Whether you know Buckethead for his crazy KFC slash mask wearing appearance, his past connections with Guns N' Roses, his skill of being a virtuoso guitar player slash multi-instrumentalist, or the fact he's made nearly a record-setting number of studio albums, without a doubt, he's one of the most interesting, polarizing, talented, elusive characters in the music industry. Let's just get into some interesting aspects of his life. Starting from the beginning. Buckethead's real name is Brian Carroll, and he just turned 50 years old. His face and voice have been of interest of anyone who's ever found out about Buckethead. I mean, if you look in any picture, he's always got the mask on, and everyone's always wondering what's behind the mask. And with the voice, I mean, he barely ever speaks, occasionally in an interview here and there. If you look at recent photos of him, you will not find a picture of his face. He's so good with hiding it. If you look back in the older pictures, you can find younger pictures of Buckethead before he donned the cap and mask. He actually played guitar in a band called Class X before the bucket and mask, and there's even footage of that online, and you can see he's a super good player, but he just doesn't have the mask on like normal. To take it back, when I first heard about Bucket and became interested, was I'm into these music flowcharts, which you can find them online, but any artists, especially artists with big catalogs, people like to make these graphic organizers. People call them flowcharts, but it just shows start with this album, branch onto this one if you like this aspect of his music. Like, look at Buckethead's. It's all over the place. There's a ton of albums, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty impressive, and heck, that's only like 20 something. I've used them to get into other artists in the past, and this was definitely a good introduction to his music. I immediately became interested once I started researching. I found out about all the different genres this oddball guitarist plays in. You've got funk, ambient, progressive metal, blues, avant-garde, even bluegrass. Also, the whopping fact that he was a member of Guns N' Roses at a certain point. I mean, I'm not a huge GNR fan, but that's a huge band, and I know a decent amount about old rock, so I was just surprised I haven't heard about him. I don't think he was Slash's replacement, but he was in the band as a guitarist for their like commercially worst album, Chinese Democracy, which I've actually heard about that album being garbage, but regardless, it's super dope he was in the band. I saw some live footage of him and all the weird traditions that he has on stage. Not so much traditions, but stuff that he does every concert. Like, he's really good at nunchucks. He'll be flinging them around the whole show. He'll bring a huge bag of gifts and he'll hand them out to audience members, and the gifts are all related to stuff he likes, like horror movies and Star Wars, stuff like that. He even dances robotically really well, and it really fits his creepy image, so he does that a bunch on stage. Those three things are in a lot of his live performances. It's part of his act. Then I found out he's actually the inventor of a guitar technique. I mean, you've got Eddie Van Halen, who invented tapping, which is like trying to get more notes into a smaller rhythm, so you're just tapping on the fretboard instead of, strumming traditionally at the bottom. But he figured out a way of, not only is it a pattern, but it's a way that you strum up in the fretboard, kind of like tapping but with an added technique, something that he came up with in order to play more complex rhythms and to fit way more notes. This playing actually created a robotic android computer sounding noise that became a very signature sound of Buckethead. Then I started looking through his list of albums, and you'll sometimes see that he dedicates songs and albums to really famous people, most notably Jordan, which is debatably one of his biggest hits. It's on Guitar Hero 2, which I've played a little bit. I don't remember the song, but it's one of the hardest difficulty songs. It's a really popular song, and of course that's dedicated to Michael Jordan. He's got a whole album dedicated to Michael Jackson, and he has another song called LeBron that he dedicates obviously to LeBron James. Then, as I dug deeper, I realized that he's worked with some super interesting people that are big in the music industry and people that I've listened to and I thought were interesting. Those being Bootsy Collins from Funkadelic, crazy bass player, with his star glasses, top hat, iconic guy. Les Claypool from Primus, one of the best bass players ever, and I'm a big Primus fan. And he worked with an actor named Viggo Mortensen, which I didn't recognize the name off the bat, but when I looked him up, holy crap, I super recognized him. He was all over. He was in the Best Picture winner last year, Green Book, most notably known for his role of Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. I mean, he's a huge actor, award-winning, and he plays a lot of albums with Buckethead, which I found super interesting. Once I saw more of the image revolving this Buckethead persona, I really became enamored with how it connected with the music. Not only does he look incredibly unique, but his music is incredibly unique and very signature of his style. I'm all about, when I hear music, I want the lyrics and the playing and the uniqueness to fit the actual person. You'll have an artist like Russ, for example, which I hate him. I don't necessarily hate his music, but they don't match. Then there's artists that are very elusive and very professional, and their lyrics are really deep and meaningful, and then you look it up, and then they're actually a cool person outside of the music. When you have both of those collide, it just, for me, it makes a bigger difference. His his music is so crazy robotic and oddball, and his appearances as well. Like I said, ominous. I like artists that are kind of out of the spotlight, you know? They're dedicated to the music, and they're not all about in the limelight on social media. Examples are like Daft Punk, Tool, Frank Ocean even, MF Doom, Ghost. I mean, whether they have a mask or not, they've got a cool appearance, cool vibe to them, and just finding out about outside of the music is interesting to me. And plus, I mean, I like weird music. There's several weird albums I like. I'm all about uniqueness. If there's an album or a person that's unique and the music's really their own, I'm down for it. Another thing that involves Buckethead is his ranking on the top players of all time. Every time I have this argument with my friends, we have the household names, and you have your actual skilled best players. If you want to go off of household names of best guitarists of all time, it's like Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page. If you really want to get technical with like who's the best player, it'd probably be like Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, random Sir Shreds a lot on YouTube. You know there's a lot of good ones on there. And like Buckethead. There's other aspects that go into that decision making, like, you know, emotion in playing, uniqueness, impact, hits, all that. But you don't really see him in the top. That's the point I'm trying to make. Like I said, with Bucket's immense skill, it's not only guitar. He plays the bass extremely good as well. It's on a lot of his albums. Some of them are mostly dedicated to bass, and you can look up performances and he's just crazy, slapping all over the place, extremely talented. It seems like any stringed instrument Bucket's got down. He's even got an entirely banjo album, and he applies his weird technical robotic style to that instrument as well. He's credited for so many instruments on albums, such like keyboard, organ, violin, saxophone, ukulele, clarinet, drums, the gong, piano, and even a recorder like the ones you play in school. A recorder Bucket is credited to have played. Weird, but very cool. Like I said, one of the things Bucket's known for, and what really made me make this video, is the insane amount of albums Buckethead is connected to. If you chop it up and organize how many different types of albums he has around 306 studio albums, 1 EP, 5 demo tapes, 4 special releases. That doesn't add up to my total, but that's a rough look of how many he has. But I wanted to go farther with those numbers. I wanted to see how many albums is Bucket really connected to. I'm not counting features, I'm counting him doing his own albums, or him doing a collaborative project with another artist, or his inclusion as a band member in the band. He can't feature with the band. I'm on the fence about a couple albums. I'll talk about them later. Some I include, some I don't. Some are a little bit of a stretch, but it's all really to prove how prolific of an artist Bucket really is. And I saw no one online has really gone through, listed these, listened to all of them, and gone through the details. So I decided I would. Also, didn't count unreleased albums, obviously. Some are released that are unreleased. It gets technical. There's a few past unreleased ones like Buckethead Plays Disney, Warm Regards, Super Diorama Theater. Those are unreleased. I don't count those, or fan albums, obviously. Right when I started this venture, I knew I had to organize. I spent hours putting all the album names and dates into an organized spreadsheet, which helped me visualize which ones I've gotten done. I mean, there's so many albums with similar names released so fast that there had to be a way to keep track of a checklist of which ones I've listened to. He's gone through so many different stages in his musical career, most notably the Pikes series, which Pikes, if you don't know what they are, I think the definition is pretty much just a short album, pretty much released in a rapid succession. He did 275 of these mini Pike albums, which I'll break down later in the video, but that really jacks up the number for how many albums I've counted in total. When you start off an adventure like this, you think, how the heck are you gonna access all these albums? The way I obtained some of these was insane, and it was just a major grind. It was mostly YouTube. I mean, so many of his albums are uploaded, and I make them into massive playlists, but a ton are on Spotify, extremely scattered around, and other various sites like MySpace, Last.fm, some random virus-ridden websites, and even in physical mediums like CDs, vinyl, even in a DVD. The way I obtained some of these albums was very cool. I contacted someone big and got lucky, so you gotta stay tuned to listen to that. But anyway, I crammed Bucket into every time slot I had, at work, hanging out with friends, in the car, in the shower. I mean, having YouTube run in your pocket for 8 hours a day at work is a massive battery drainer, but it was worth it in the end. I mean, I was charging on my breaks, and I was switching AirPods at work just to try to get as much Bucket into the day as possible. When I got down to the last couple of albums, trying to find these was such a pain. I mean, I'm looking at the library, deep in the internet, and I just accepted the fact that I was gonna have to pay for some at the end, so I bought a couple. When I got done with listening to all of them, it was around 6 weeks in total. This was because if you add up all the ones I listened to, it was 415 albums. Very calculated number. I include in exclude several albums, which gets complicated, but I'll explain. And if you add up the hours, it was around 218 hours of listening. Approximately 9 days worth of listening, which is insane to think about after the fact. The calculation was done on a counting spreadsheet, which took in itself forever because I added up the total of all the albums. Overly complicated, but I had to know how many days did I spend doing this. When I started listening to these, I like to do this thing where I glance at the album titles or the songs. I like to get a good mental library going, to reference, but I threw that concept way out the window after like the 15th album because of the sheer number of things to remember. Instead, I decided to just soak in the entire experience and just get very general ideas, and anything that poked out to me, I just made a note on instead. In terms of order of listening, really all over the place. I mean, I had the dates down and I knew kind of what the order was, but the way Spotify had them organized and various websites, I just made sure I had them all listened to, but not even close to it in the right order, which I really don't think takes away that much of it. The music's pretty similar on a lot of the albums. When I first saw this whopping number, I thought it was kind of the Gucci Mane effect, where it's like every year pumping out an album, or it's just too many. I don't like artists that make too many albums where it's an emphasis on quantity over quality. I reversed that thinking with Buckethead because it's such a large number, it just changes my perspective. I think it's more impressive than annoying. You could think of it that it's similar to the modern streaming strategy where artists will have 20, 25 song long albums, just getting as much out there for people to listen to increase profit. Instead, I don't think Buckethead was doing it for money. If you really look into him as a person, I think he's doing it for the music. I mean, he has so much passion and emotion into his playing. It definitely doesn't seem like he's pumping these out for money at all. So now I'll go over the 415 albums, not every one specifically, but I'll break down the most notable parts and different chunks and just how I soaked it in and my consensus at the end. So enjoy. To start the breakdown of the 415 Buckethead albums, we'll start with the 32 non-Pikes studio albums. The first was released in 1992 with Buckethead Land, and the most recent is Buckethead Land 5-13-1031 in 2018. Right off the bat, when I started listening to these, I noticed the crazy amount of vibe changes that occur. I mean, we'll have a typical rock album, to a shredathon, to a super depression album, to super hype, and then back to ballads. It's all over the place, and it really shows how far his talent reaches with the way he can produce such an emotional roller coaster. It almost forms a pattern of chill, crazy, regular, chill, crazy, regular. You really notice it once you listen to him in a sort of an order. These albums produced most of his hits. Songs like Soothsayer, Big Sur Moon, and Nottingham Lace are all within these 32 albums. Even his most successful album commercially, Monsters and Robots, is within these 32. You'll find out fast that Buckethead is the master of album lengths. I mean, with pretty consistent 45 minutes on each one of these 32 albums. It became noticeable to me, but it seems like he's got a formula down. What I really liked about this section of albums is the lack of the repetitive nature, was just the uniqueness in the themes and the concepts for each one of these albums. With some other albums later that I listened to, they get pretty repetitive and they follow a lot of the same patterns. Not to say they're bad, but it just made me realize that I liked these albums that I started with the most because of how they're super unique, and they're a bunch of concept albums with varied genres, layouts, and cool guest appearances here and there. When you look at his first album, Buckethead Land, it's actually one of my favorites, not because it's the first, because it's got a really cool concept and it introduces this imaginary theme park of Buckethead Land, and if you listen to it, it's got a lot of unique sounds and stuff that you don't really hear later. His second album, titled Giant Robot, is one of many references to the show called Johnny Soko and His Flying Robot that Buckethead is a massive fan of. You'll hear me reference it a lot because it's one of Buckethead's favorite shows and just one of his favorite things to include in albums. If you look at the dates when they were released, he usually released 2 or 3 studio albums each year. Not super consistent, but there was a sort of a pattern. From these 32, you have some eccentric, off-the-wall, intense albums like Day of the Robot, Funnel Weaver, and The Island of Lost Minds. But sprinkled throughout are some soft, super easygoing, chill, soothing guitar playing albums like Colma, Electric Tears, and Population Override. They really contradict each other, but it's really nice to get a break from each type of album. Some of the highlights within these is Enter the Chicken, which is an album that Buckethead worked with Serge Tonkin from System of a Down, another guy that I knew before Buckethead, which I've been interested in their music and I thought it was sweet they had a collab. Another noteworthy one is the crazy cyborgish alien album Kaleidoscope, which the music on it is super unique crazy electronic, robotic. I really liked it because of how unique it was. Actually, when I look back at all 415, my favorite album is within these, which is Albino Slug, now known as Clock on Wise. I just remember being super catchy and close to standard rock music. A little bit more accessible, but I remember really liking it. Towards the bottom of this section, there's actually a banjo-only album. Super cool to see Bucket on yet another stringed instrument that he's skilled at. He's doing the nubbing, the crazy fast rhythms on a banjo that you don't typically hear. It was super unique to hear that. There's also a lot of bass playing within these 32. There was the album that followed up Buckethead Land, the original, called Buckethead Land 2. Really cool concept with some vocal samples in between. Really gruesome, corny kind of stuff to create this image of this imaginary amusement park. Honestly, I think Travis Scott got a little inspiration off the cover if you ask me, but nonetheless, another really cool concept album. Among these, there's some super cool titles like Somewhere Over the Slaughterhouse or Cuckoo Clocks from Hell, Slaughterhouse on the Prairie, Inbred Mountain, and The Elephant Man's Alarm Clock. Also, there's some cool covers as well like Forensic Follies, Cyborg Slunks, and Pepper's Ghost. If you haven't already noticed, Buckethead uses a lot of the same terms, coined in a lot of the titles, like Slaughterhouse references, the word scalp, slunk, and a lot of references to roller coasters, ghosts, ghouls, monsters, and major references to chickens. Not only with the KFC bucket on his head, but he just has so many puns and play on words in the titles relating to chickens. It's a lot of part of his image. Overall, these albums are some of the most accessible in my opinion because they're varied in structure, genre, mood, production, concept. Some of it's typical rock, but it also has some really unique standout albums. Definitely what I would recommend starting with if I was to get into Buckethead as a beginner. Now to get into the 275 Pike albums. It's infamously connected to Buckethead, brings him a lot of the fame because people hear such a crazy number of albums, and especially the short period of time on which they were released. Like I said before, they're short albums, about 30 minutes in length, which is similar to what I said with Buckethead and the Masters album length. These are all pretty on the dot, within seconds of each other. With the concept that goes with them is kind of a comic book aesthetic. You can see that by the covers with the little corner and the numbering and the little 13 cents, but they're supposed to be distributed from this imaginary kiosk in Buckethead Land in his abusement park, which was a really cool concept to back it up. The start of the Pike series was in 2011. From there on out, he had 4 in that year, 5 in 2012, 31 in 2013, 60 in 2014, 118 albums in 2015, 24 in 2016, and then 32 in 2017. With the obvious peak in 2015, he was releasing on average of every 6 days an album. Also, when he embarked on this journey of creating all these small albums, he took a break from all his other bands that he was connected with, stopped touring, and just released these on a rapid pace. And he did it purely for the sake of music. When you hear about people talk about him or him say it himself, he just did it for the sake of music, and he just loves putting as much work out there as possible. A lot of them were initially released untitled and no covers, but later came out with some really unique album artwork to remain having no covers still. And another unique one, Pike 13, actually has a self-released image of Buckethead's face. He decided to have it on there. It's him and his dad. It doesn't have the normal comic book logo in the corner, and it stands out from the rest, but it's a really cool outlier from the rest of the group. A notable section within the 275 is Pikes 75 through 106, which is called the Silver Shamrock series, which he literally released an album every day during October in 2015, leading up to Halloween. They were super dark, ambient, and it was a really cool mood. It was a really dark, dreary mood. They stand out from the other albums, and it's a super cool concept. I mean, releasing an album every day of the month leading up to a holiday. He'll title them like 31 days, 30 days, 29 days, and at the end he'll do 365 days to Halloween. Cool concept and super impressive. Actually, you can still buy these albums like you can the other Pikes, but the Silver Shamrock series comes on this cool pumpkin flash drive that's like $40, which I almost bought, but a little pricey. Halloween wasn't the only holiday Buckethead had a Pike for. He actually did one on Christmas called Raindrops on Christmas, which had a bunch of like background elves singing. Really weird and a definite standout one from the 275. Throughout the Pikes, he's got a lot of family member dedications, which people know him by because his biggest song, Soothsayer, is like a dedication to his Aunt Susie. He's got albums on here that are dedicated to his parents that passed away, most notably Pikes 65 and 150. During these mini albums, he has so many sounds, so many tones and effects that he uses. I mean, his pedal board has to be insane. I've seen videos of him online switching pedals like crazy, but I mean, he has so many effects going on. They, of course, get repetitive because there's so many of them. There's only so many sounds you can produce, but he had so many unique things going on. It was really a joy to hear all the different effects that he could come up with. Bands that he sounded like, he had like an album that sounded like an Aphex Twin project, a Nick Drake project, The Residents, Blue Man Group, all over the place with his sound. He also had some sound effects thrown in and some guitar effects that emulated like an automaton, if you know what that is, Animal Crossing NPC voices, and some sprinkled in jingles from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Jeopardy. Those kind of iconic jingles or songs that everyone knows. He throws a lot of those in songs. Like, he'll have a Star Wars theme in there, and they'll poke out every so often, but he throws in some pop culture references, which is pretty cool. Titling these had to be a bear. He actually didn't do it in the beginning, like I said. Throughout these, there's some really cool titles, like Roller Coaster Track Repair, It Smells Like Frogs, Hide It in the Pickling Jar, Snow Slug, Screaming Scalp, Maple Syrup, Last House on Slunk Street, A Ghost Took My Homework, Chicken Coop Scope, Rotten Candy Cane, Squid Ink Lodge, 222222222, Thoratic Spine Collapser, Sonar Rainbow, Guillotine Furnace, and The Abominable Snow Scalp. Like I said, with the weird experimental sounds he's got going on, you could easily throw these as a video game background music or some menu music and it would fit perfectly. I was even getting some Skyrim flashbacks while listening to some of the softer stuff. Like I said, there's a lot of crazy music, but there also is a lot of soft emotional albums as well. Not only is he praised for his extreme technical skill, but the immense emotion Buckethead can throw into his music. And it's really impressive to see the contradiction between the crazy and the chill. And actually, the Pikes series was the last albums I listened to. Don't get me wrong, the music isn't bad, but it was incredibly grindy towards the end. Not only was it the last couple hundred of albums, but they get crazy repetitive. I don't know if Bucket does these purely by himself. I've been curious how he gets all the drum beats in his songs, but you'll hear like he'll throw a rhythm guitar part down and it'll be repeating for like a 7-minute song, and you kind of pick out some patterns, which I mean that's kind of what you have to do with the rapid succession albums, but they get a little annoying. The concept of you've heard one, you heard it all doesn't apply to Bucket, but you could say you've heard 5 or 6 and you've heard them all, especially in the Pike series. I mean, if Bucket threw repeated songs on the albums, you know, just to up the numbers, I wouldn't notice it at all, to be honest. But the overall experience was positive, constantly commending the production and the overall quality because it doesn't dip, it stays consistently good, and when you see the release dates, it's crazy how good these albums sound. Incredibly professional. Occasionally I got pissed off. I mean, some of these albums are crazy ear rape, and some of these notes Bucket are hitting, I gotta whip the earbuds out. And I mean, it took 6 weeks to listen to all these albums, and I'm missing out on a lot of new releases, but it had to be done. Pretty much for the Pikes. It was an impressive feat, quality music for instrumental lovers, because there's no singing in any of these. And if you have the time, data, and battery time, it's definitely worth listening to these, especially for the feat of saying that you've done it. Now the next group of albums that I categorized was special releases, kind of a blanket term. What it includes is albums that aren't studio albums, but they're like associated Buckethead albums. I grouped all the weird releases together like EPs, live albums, demo tapes, soundtracks, and uncategorizable albums that I just decided to throw under the blanket of special releases. First note right off the bat is Acoustic Shards, which I think is one of the few Buckethead at least emphasized acoustic albums. Super nice change of pace. Hearing a lot of chill acoustic playing just shows Buckethead's versatile with instruments again. From there you have From the Coop, which is a compilation of demo tape songs, which repeat sometimes when I listen to other demo tapes, but it was kind of cool to hear some of the best of the unreleased kind of stuff. Then there's the 13 volume In the Search of series, which are these 13 albums of similar lengths released together as a package deal, and Bucket actually did hand-drawn covers for all the releases until the demand came too high. They have an overall ambiguous concept. They're grouped together with the 13, and I definitely counted those individually. Then, technically, Buckethead only has a single EP. It's called KFC Skin Piles, which obviously connects to the bucket he wears on his head. Actually, the only KFC in the title reference, surprisingly. But it's like more electronic
electronic music, some DJ scratching stuff, some like made for like a purpose of sampling and DJ use. I remember it had a Michael Jackson sample on it that I can't believe wasn't copyrighted. It was such a long sample, but it was nice to hear that, you know, again, change of pace. Then onto the live album category, which he only has one, released in 2018, wasn't online anywhere. I checked. I thought because it was recent, but then I looked and it's apparently only CD and vinyl release, so I bought the vinyl and listened to it that way, which was a cool way to listen to a Buckethead album. Then on to the demo tapes, which he has 6 of. First one was titled Brazos, which is pretty much a single song to my knowledge, but it's extremely important because he entered this song into a Guitar Player magazine contest. He got second place, but it got him crazy recognition and it let everyone know of his unique playing style. Then next was the Giant Robot demo tape, again another reference to the show that Bucket is such a fan of. It was a project with this drummer named Brain, which you'll see Bucket does a lot of work with, but it was just a small demo tape to something that was going to become bigger. Then there's Buckethead Blueprints, which is a demo version of his first album, Buckethead Land. Then there's the series of 3 what he calls grab bag demo albums, which were released on cassettes, and they're just compilations of rare recordings, you know, scattered songs that he has here and there. Then onto the soundtrack category, which Buckethead only has 2. He's contributed to a ton of movies, games, TV shows, like individual songs or features like Twisted Metal the Game, Saw, Mortal Kombat, Beverly Hills Ninja, Dragon Ball Z. I didn't count those because those are just individual songs. They were unique songs made for each one of those titles, which there is a lot more of. I only counted ones where he did the complete soundtrack. The 2 soundtracks are for Sigil for Doom and a film called Flesh for the Beast. Sigil is actually just a small PC free Doom game that Bucket just made the soundtrack for in 2019 actually. Flesh for the Beast is actually some weird obscure B movie. It's not known and it was impossible to find online, but I actually found the DVD that includes the soundtrack, which was one of the things I actually had to purchase and get a physical copy to listen to. I didn't actually include these, but I did listen to them and I thought it'd be worth mentioning. Of 2 personalized albums Buckethead did. The reason I didn't count them because I really don't know how many there are, because he had this contest where he came out with this offer to release personalized albums for people. You would submit your name, submit maybe a theme, and he would create like around an hour-long project for you and just title it after your name. I found ones online for someone named Greg and Melissa, and it was riddled with a bunch of iconic jingles, like I said, Star Wars, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I didn't count them, but they were super cool because which artist offers to make personalized entire albums? I thought it was worth mentioning. So for the final, but extremely lengthy category is the related bands and collab projects that Buckethead has done throughout his career. To get right into it, a unique group of Buckethead albums in this category isn't actually him in a band, but it's actually just a different persona, a different name he goes by. He released 6 albums under the name of Death Cube K, which is some made-up character which appears to be a photo-negative version of Buckethead, which in his character concept is someone that Buckethead has nightmares about. It's really corny, but it's kind of cool how there's a story behind the weird imaginary character. He never performs as this character. The change in name was actually to get out of a Sony contract agreement. He was having issues releasing on their label, so he just changed his name, and he actually went with a style change too. If you listen to these, it's some of the most unique projects he has. They're super ambient, dark, droning sounds, super video game music-esque. Within these 6 albums, they were pretty nice to listen to, except for like Monolith, which was literally 3 hours. That was a little grindy, but overall, it's cool how he's got an alter ego. Next, like I mentioned earlier, Buckethead has worked with Bootsy Collins, which you'll see later he's formed several bands with, but one of them is Zillotron, which in 1993 he made an album called Lord of the Harvest as the band Zillotron, and all that I remember of it is really cool cover, but like it was insanely quiet. I remember barely being able to hear this album at work, but overall, you got a crazy bass player like Bootsy and a guitarist like Bucket. The collab has to be good. Also, like I previously mentioned with the drummer Brain, who Brain is he's actually Bucket's best friend and bandmate in several bands. Even Guns N' Roses, which they were a member of at the same time, he was in a band Bucket also is connected with named Traxxas, another one called Colonel's Claypool Bucket of Bernie Brains, El Stew, Science Faction, and others. It all started with Brain being more famous than Bucket in the beginning and introducing him to bands like Primus and Limbo Maniacs, which are connected with Bucket because he featured, but I didn't count those albums at all. Like Brain, there's several names that pop up a bunch with Buckethead. He's got this community of people that he works with, which you'll hear the name repeated a lot. People like Bill Laswell. If you don't know who he is, he's a super famous producer and he connects with a lot of artists in Buckethead's circle. But Bill, Brain, and Bucket have a lot of projects together. But what the emphasis I'm trying to make is Bucket works with Brain, who Brain's got a lot of connections, and Bucket has a lot of connections with a lot of similar people who make similar music. You can maybe attribute that to his crazy amount of albums, is the fact that he has such a good group of people of such varied talents that he makes albums with. When you break down his and Brain's relationship, they collaborated on albums like Kevin's Noodle House and Brain as Ham Noodle, which these titles are really weird. Brain said in an interview they randomly got these names from reading road signs while on the road touring, but these albums have some good chemistry between a skilled drummer and a skilled guitarist. They also formed a band called Pieces, which they made one album called I Need 5 Minutes Alone, which is not only unique for its music, weird concepts, and weird structure, but the topics they talk about include like a song about a porn star, and if you actually look, which I didn't realize off first listen, I'm not sure the exact song, but Bucket actually sings on one of these songs. I had no clue it was him the first time I listened to it, but once I heard that, I listened to it again, I'm like, holy crap, that is Buckethead's voice. One of the few times Bucket shows his voice, let alone sings on a track. Then there's other obscure Brain projects like Best Regards and Kind Regards, and the unreleased Warm Regards, which, like I said, didn't count that. Best Regards being a 5-volume set of albums, and Kind Regards being a 3-volume set. It features an artist named Melissa Reese on keyboard, and again, it has these weird hand-drawn covers. These are some of the more rare Buckethead albums. They were accessible online, but I think it was when Buckethead was going through health issues, but he still wanted to continue making music, so I think these were made around that period. Nevertheless, unique projects, and I mean lengthy. There's 8 of these in this series. So, like I said, with Buckethead's tight circle of artists, another hugely connected name is Travis Dickerson. Travis Dickerson is a big Buckethead collaborator. He produces so many of his projects, he plays keyboard on so many of Bucket's albums, and is the owner of Travis Dickerson Recording Studios, which is where a lot of Buckethead albums were actually recorded. The two have several projects connected to each other, like the Chicken Noodle albums, which there's 2 of them, Chicken Noodles 1 and Chicken Noodles 2, which was my first experience hearing Bucket with like a prominent keyboardist, which was very enjoyable because it brought more of a jazz aspect, which Bucket does later in his career, but hearing 2 skilled instrumentalists playing together, especially keyboard and guitar, was very nice to listen to and a nice change of pace. And then you throw the jazz vibe in there, and I was really digging it. There's also Iconography and Left Hanging. They were enjoyable because of how out of the norm they were and how unique they were to past projects. The 2 formed a band called the Dragons of Eden, and it was actually with Brain as well, and they just did a self-titled debut, which again was a nice album, really cool artwork as well. One of my more favorite Buckethead albums that's connected to Travis is they did this project connecting with Alex Lambert, a filmmaker, titled Running After Deer, and it had this boxing concept where they have a bunch of vocal inserts of this either boxer or trainer, but it kind of told a story, and I enjoyed listening to that. It even has some theremin in it, which if you don't know what that is, it's like an instrument you don't play with your hands. So with that inclusion, that even added to its coolness. Then their biggest project together was this band named Thanatopsis, which was just them 2 with a drummer named Rami Anton, and it was a progressive instrumental jazz fusion band, which was definitely easy listening, but it also had some crazy stuff in there too. They came out with 4 albums, first with a self-titled debut, aka Skyrim Dwarven Helmet, Axiology, Atatomize, and Requiem, and these started in 2001 with the final album being in 2015. Another really minor, not super important band they did was called Gorgon, which they only released 1 album, almost completely improvised music, and it was like outtakes and B-sides from other projects they had that they just compiled into 1 album. Bucket then has a bunch of albums that are just small bands, only a couple members, that produced a few albums, and they never really took off, but you can see he dipped his toes in a lot of different ideas. One of those smaller bands was Arcana, which Bucket played a lot on. The album is called Ark of Testimony. This album is noted for its jazz fusion, and actually during the production of the album, the drummer died, which was crazy, but other than that, I mean, the album was really enjoyable. It's such an obscure title of his, but it was cool cool because I like the more jazz aspects of Bucket's discography. One of the weirdest bands Bucket did was Cobra Strike, which Buckethead led this band. Again, it had Brain in it, and Travis also was a common collaborator with the band. Another huge member was an artist named Pinchface, which Bucket has so many projects connected to. The music's super avant-garde, metal. They only made 2 albums, with the first being 13th Scroll and then the second being Y, Y plus B, X plus Y, hold arrow, which looks like a video game cheat code or some sort of button combo, but the name's based off a video game, so it makes sense. Like I mentioned earlier, Buckethead has several projects connected to Les Claypool, which he's one of the more famous people that Bucket has worked with. Like the previously mentioned Monsters and Robots, that was kind of a collaborative album. And again, the chemistry between an insane bass player and an insane guitar player is always cool to hear. Les Claypool started a band called Colonels Claypool Bucket of Bernie Brains, which Bucket was also a member of. Brain again was in this band, and it had a member named Bernie Warhol, which is actually a super famous keyboardist and past Funkadelic member who Bucket's in other bands with. Also, the previously mentioned Bill Laswell is connected with this band. They really technically only released 1 album, but there is a second one unreleased online called The Catalyst, which I counted. The band does pretty much improvised music only, especially their shows are completely improvised, but they're such skilled instrumentalists that it doesn't even matter. To keep going on the crazy list of Buckethead bands, there's also the Deli Creeps, which has that, like I mentioned earlier, Pinchface member, and it had a frequent collaborator in it named Maximum Bob, a super unique character that was the main singer in the band and just a crazy frontman. Not a ton of stuff is known about the band. They only made 1 album, and then 2 demo tapes, one in 1990 and one in 1996, that are actually on the internet. The band's got a weird vibe, and the music is really weird, but unique nonetheless. Next is El Stu, which is a band that Bucket was in with a heavy emphasis of electronic music, scratching, with Brain again, and friend of Bucket, DJ Disc, aka Photosyncograph Disc. Hard name to pronounce, but he goes by both names. These projects included a lot of electronic, dance, EDM kind of stuff, and a ton of sampling. They actually came out with 3 albums: No Hesitation, The Rehearsal, and A Dark Night of a Million Stains, and a single EP named Extended Play 1.0. While on the topic of DJ Disc, I was going to include several projects that they had together. 4 albums to be exact: Ancient Termites, Live at Slim's, Unreleased, and Marsupial's Belly Flop Breaks, with a lot of scratching, sampling, electronic aspect, really hip-hop-esque. I actually ended up not including them, and another related album called Devil Dub. Decided to not include them in the final number because Bucket's more featuring on them than actually a member of any band. DJ Disc and Buckethead's unreleased album is pretty much a Buckethead album, but is one of, if not the rarest Buckethead album to get your hands on. There's one on eBay right now for like $300. I tried contacting the guy for a digital copy, but there was no way it was happening, and I didn't even include any of their works to the final number, so I dropped it. Plus, someone recorded Marsupial's album, individual songs, on YouTube, on vinyl. The whole thing was a pain, so I just decided to not count it because it was more leaning on the feature side. Back onto smaller bands, smaller projects, there was the Frankenstein Brothers he did with a single album called Bolt on Neck. It was just Bucket and this guy called That One Guy, who's a talented bass player, which was nice to hear some emphasis on bass playing. Being a bass player myself, it is nice hearing some crazy slapping bass because it's not prominent on most of the albums. And apparently that album had an award-winning album cover, which I could see. It's super sick. Then another project, which was super not a big deal, was Science Faction, a small project with Bucket, Bootsy, Brain, and others that was more like a compilation of music from the varying artists with pretty standard singing over it. What I mean is, like, it's really accessible rock music, and it really caught my ear being different from Bucket's normal music. It was never a really serious deal, but cool title, cool concept of members, and really accessible compared to most of Buckethead's albums. Then, not only has he had a demo tape and a studio album named after the show, he actually formed a band called Giant Robot, which was inevitable, and it was just another project of his, Brain on drums. They created one self-titled album. They're known for having super low pressings on physical copies, so when people want to collect Bucket, Giant Robot is some of the most sought after stuff. I even counted an unreleased album that's kind of released online called Siren 19 in 2007, way after the initial album. The final 2 smaller projects, first first was with a Japanese musician named Shin Terry, where Buckethead made 3 albums called Unison, Heaven and Hell, and Light Years, which aren't super notable. I just remember being super relaxing, ambient, and some more kind of jazz stuff. Then there was a project with Jonas Hellborg and Michael Shrive with an album named Octave of the Holy Innocents, which is like more of an unplugged album with an acoustic emphasis. Some deem it a prog metal album. Anyway, an oddball title in his discography. And I had to squeeze in this band Buckets in called Moonraker, which I found out about last minute with their album Live at the Knitting Factory, which is technically unreleased, but it's his collaborative band with this DJ named DJ Flair, and I listened to it on some virus-ridden site, but I had to include it because it is a Buckethead band. Now we're going to talk about some of the most important Buckethead projects, some of his most important bodies of work. First, with Viggo Mortensen.
Hello again. This section is being taped a month and a half after I listened to all the other Buckethead projects. At this point, I'm almost done with the video, but there's a couple projects that I was yet to listen to. This was until I branched out and got pretty lucky. It all started when I found out Viggo had about 12 projects with Buckethead. Sort of 11, but the album This, That, and the Other is kind of a compilation of older tracks. But then I realized I gotta listen to all 12 of these, and they're pretty hard to find. There's only 3 on YouTube. I don't know if others are taken down because of copyright, but they're like nowhere else on the internet. No dicey sites, no torrents, nothing. And eBay was a little pricey, and there wasn't even many on there. So I decided to go straight to the source. So I wanted to contact Viggo, but he didn't have any social media, so I made an IMDb Pro account, found his management company email, and actually contacted him, not thinking I was gonna get any results. I just sent a lengthy email talking about my project, talking about how long I've been working on it, and that I need to listen to all these albums and analyze them. So I sent the email with not much hope, but then the next day, I actually received an email back, which super shocked me, because Viggo's a huge actor. He's like AAA, Best Picture winner last year, like I said, huge movies he's in. So I received this email and I start to read it. Viggo's interested in helping. Not only does his management company say they can hook me up with a copy of each one that they have, but Viggo's working in London and he'll have them sent over after his project, which was around October. But then a couple weeks ago, I actually received the packages early, couple boxes. Inside, I was shocked. As you can see, I received some, and they didn't charge me. They were really nice. I actually found out about the site that sold all of them, so I saw some you could purchase, but I was late on that discovery. But they sent me vinyl, they sent me CDs, and pretty much all the ones I needed. And I also had to buy his album Recent Forgeries in actually a book format, which actually today I don't even have yet. Been waiting for it for a while, but it's supposed to have the CD inside of it to listen to. But I actually bought the CD This, That, and the Other on their website. This website being Percival Press, which I think is his management, at least his music management company. With that said, they were generous enough to send me almost all the albums I needed, all for free. I was extremely grateful. I sent a long thank you, and I listened to all of them, and then I realized I don't even have the first Viggo album. I can't listen to it. I cannot get the first Viggo album. Technically, I can buy it for $95 on eBay, but that's way too pricey for me. This first one of his, one less thing to worry about, limited to 1,000 copies. Apparently, it's like his weirdest project yet, and his first with Buckethead, one of his first music ones, period. He actually worked on that project with Travis Dickerson, which he did a bunch of projects with, so I thought, let me contact him, maybe he has a copy. I actually contacted Travis, got a hold of him fast. He was extremely helpful. He told me information about it. He didn't have it, and he didn't have a digital copy or anything. He sent me the same eBay link I actually found, but I wasn't interested in that expensive one. So with the first one unable to be listened to, I listened to the other ones, and the music was a definite change of pace. A lot of it was just soft piano playing, and then some of it was like some crazy stuff. Mostly really calm, basically elevator music, really chill stuff. It'll really put you to sleep, because I was actually driving to my dad's house listening to some of the YouTube Viggo albums, and I was drifting, I'm not gonna lie. Regardless of that, there is some crazy stuff on there, especially on Intelligence Failure, which was one of my favorite Viggo albums, one of my favorite Buckethead albums. It's all about this 9/11 conspiracy, bunch of snippets from George Bush, super crazy, extremely entertaining to listen to. Weirdest samples of all 415 albums. So that one was cool. The other ones were really normal. There's some like One Man's Meat, which honestly gave me Meat is Murder vibes by the Smiths. A lot of it's talking about anti-meat consumption, and there's a lot of crazy vocal snippets in it, a lot of weird dialogue, weird playing. That's the thing with Viggo albums. A lot of them are like spoken word, poetry, political messages. The other ones are like really chill, relaxing piano music. A lot of it was reminiscent of Minecraft music. Like some of these you could have thrown on the Minecraft soundtrack and would have blended in perfectly. Some of these you might think are just Buckethead features, because I said I'm not doing any projects where he features on a song. But Viggo is more of a band. He always has like the same people. Like he has so many projects with Buckethead. It's definitely a band, more of a collaborative effort, especially on Reunion, where it literally says Viggo Mortensen and Buckethead. The cool thing actually about the CDs is they all have like... Sorry, my RA just came in.
Anyway, like I was saying with the CDs, like I said, a lot of them have dedications on them, whether it's like family, friends, or important people to Viggo and Bucket. On 17 Odd Songs, you can see it's Tom and Nancy Carroll, which, like I said, Brian Carroll's Buckethead, so it's his parents, which was pretty cool to see. Other interesting things is I saw on Travis's site, during one of the recordings, like I said, Viggo is Aragorn in Lord of the Rings, so they actually have Frodo, and I think some other Lord of the Rings cast come in and do some background vocals. I'm not sure which album, but I thought that was super cool. There's a picture of Frodo in the recording studio laying down on a Buckethead project. Bucket's connections are crazy. It's cool to see he's working with such a huge actor. It's just really out of the norm with the other projects, because the other people aren't that big of names, besides like Guns N' Roses. Anyway, for the Viggo albums, they were hard to find. I got lucky with him sending me them for free. The music was pretty good too, relaxing, nice change of pace, a little bit of crazy stuff here and there. Overall, cool things at albums. I have a lot of physical copies now, and I'll definitely hold on to them because it's super cool how I got them. Thanks to Percival Press for sending them, and on to the next band.
Another huge Buckethead band is Guns N' Roses, like I've said several times. He played on their Chinese Democracy album, which took forever to come out. It's a garbage album, but it is so cool that he's on such a big band. That's where Bucket started getting a lot of his wealth, because his previous projects weren't that profitable, but of course Guns N' Roses, one of the biggest rock bands at the time, was a smart move financially for Bucket, but he didn't stay long. He left over some disputes and mostly their inability to focus and create albums. Like, just imagine Bucket's urge to create an album while Axl Rose is taking his time. Like, Bucket's got to be thinking, I could have easily created 75 albums in the time that it takes to make this one garbage album. It was just so fitting when I saw Bucket had a quote talking about their inability to make an album, when Bucket has so many more albums to his name. Then, a big part of his career, but the worst part of the Buckethead journey, was his inclusion in the band Cornbugs. What this band is a group of previously mentioned names, but most importantly, the lead singer, Bill Moseley. He's known for his character of Chop Top, which is a character in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. I've never seen it, but I know Bucket loves Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He loves horror movies in general, so that had to do a lot with his meeting of this Bill Moseley character. Anyway, they released 8 albums together, which was so grindy for me. Easily the worst part of the listening experience, because the lyrics and the whole avant-garde spoken word slam poetry stuff was just like major cringe to me. I really never caught on to it, and with 8 albums, it really got old. I could say it's pretty much the only negative experience I had during the whole journey. I mean, there's weird song topics, off the wall stuff, weird character personas they take on. I don't know, it was just annoying stuff. Bill is a little much to take in. Once I got past those, I'm like, that has to be the lowest point, so it was kind of a relief after that. Back to some projects I did like, was Bucket's inclusion in one of the most talent-packed groups ever. The band is named Praxis. They're quite a supergroup. They created 12 albums together, emphasizing on improvised music, immense instrumental skill, and oddball weird fusions of DJing, shredding, technical drum playing, jazzy keyboards. Members included Bucket, Brain, Bootsy, Bernie Warhol, Bill Laswell, the famous producer, DJ Disc, the previously mentioned DJ. I mean, it was a crazy lineup. All of them were like some of the best in their musical field on each one of their respective instruments. The albums are pretty varied in production styles, and it's a lot of mix of live albums and kind of compilations of different works of each individual artist that they kind of compiled. Nevertheless, it was some interesting stuff. You can really hear some technical playing in there. They had elements of funk, hip-hop, metal, jazz. Within these 12 albums, there was the album Collection, which is pretty much a greatest hits, but it was impossible to find online. I was downloading it using some torrent, but then I realized I could just individually find the songs from the Praxis albums and pretty much say I listened to it, so that was legit at the end of the day. You could almost say the band was an Avengers of sorts when you just compile the best of the best. Moving on, one of the last ones, sort of related to Praxis, which I initially counted as one of his bands, was his inclusion of this band called Company 91. What the band was sort of not a set band with like members, but more of a talented artists that were really good at like improvising music, emphasis on percussion, trombone, bass, sax. They would meet up for like a week and record an album, and it was kind of similar with super skilled members. Bucket more kind of featured on the albums, and he wasn't on every song. There's a Company 91 volume 1, 2, and 3, all released in the same year. I didn't want to buy them, and I also kind of felt slimy about including them, so I didn't. Cool group nonetheless. I even saw that they were on Spotify, and I used this Spotify album availability website to try to find it and used a VPN. It was such a pain, and like I said, I was on the fence, didn't count them. And boom, that's it. That's all the Buckethead related albums. And if you actually do the math, that's 415.
all the previously mentioned albums. According to my spreadsheet, according to a ton of research, that's it for Buckethead albums.
Now that we've gone over all 415 associated Buckethead albums, I can look back and think of the experience of it was definitely grindy, but it was pretty positive. With any artist of any type of music, if they make that many albums, it's gonna get repetitive, and it definitely was with Buckethead, but it wasn't negative. But I didn't mind it that much. If it was anything in the realm of super sad, country, pop music, those categories, I couldn't listen to the sheer amount that I did. But with Buckethead, I really got in a rhythm, and I always knew what I was gonna listen to, so it really wasn't that bad. Missing some new releases over the 6 weeks kind of sucked, but to look at the main goal of listening to all these, it really wasn't so I could name a ton of Buckethead albums off the top of my head or pick out a song when I hear it. It's really to, to do it, to say I did it, which probably would be for anyone who listens to that many of them. I mean, I'm not going to go back to Pike 65 and Pike 175 and listen to those. A few Buckethead songs I might reflect back on, but overall, it was more of a challenge for me. I would say if you're looking to get into Buckethead, I would definitely start with his studio albums. Definitely the most accessible, the most varied sounds. In terms of structure, you'll know what I mean when you listen to him, but later in Bucket's discography, he just starts doing the same kind of pattern and formula. In his beginning ones, there's a lot of cool concepts, so I'd definitely try with those. I mean, he's not even that popular. I might have gone into too much depth with him and act like a lot of people know stuff about him. He's only really got like over 200,000 monthly listeners on Spotify. Like I said, besides his inclusion in Guns N' Roses, a lot of people don't even know about him, or maybe just know what he looks like. But once you find out more information, he's super interesting. And the fact that he's still making music, he's 50 years old, and he even has health issues, is pretty amazing. There's actually one lengthy interview on YouTube where Bucket is interviewed by this therapist, and it opens your eyes a little bit about his life because he barely ever talks, or especially about personal stuff. So if you want to find out more about Bucket as a person, I would listen to that. Bucket really cut ties when he started his Pike series, so I feel like that kind of killed a little bit of his popularity. He was even going to be with Ozzy Osbourne for a while, but you can see online Ozzy had an issue with the bucket and the mask, how he wanted to take it off. But just because he's kind of slept on doesn't mean the music isn't great. So I would definitely try out the Bucket 415 albums. And again, where I got that number, some people could have issues with it. I excluded some things, and I included some things that are a little on the fence. Some unreleased albums that were technically released online, I definitely counted those. But the ones like the Company 91 albums, his work with DJ Disc, some of the personalized albums he did, I originally counted, but I decided against it. A lot of the reasons because of that is because I relied super heavily off the Wikipedia page, which I know that's super surface level poser sources, but more I looked and more I compared to other websites, it was actually a rock solid list. I even checked these forums, wikis, and I really was referring back to Wikipedia. It was rock solid with features, single appearances, multiple appearances, bands and collabs, studio albums, Pike series, all the matching dates, all the people who worked with. That's the go-to sources, Wikipedia discography page. Referenced it 1,000 times. And I'm super curious if I missed any Buckethead albums. I'm pretty sure I didn't, but if I did, let me know, because I definitely want to listen to them and keep raising that number. And I'm especially going to keep my eye out for new releases, and I'll even like make a comment at my page about it because I want to keep up with Bucket. I find him super interesting. Don't know if he's in my top artist, but I would definitely recommend him to anyone who loves rock music in general. If you're trying to do the entire listening experience, obtaining these is a huge pain. It's a lot of YouTube, it's a lot of searching. You're even gonna probably have to buy some stuff. I mean, I feel a little bad that I'm maybe retracting money that Bucket would get, but there's so many albums, and I did pay for a lot of them, and I did use it on streaming platforms, so he does get paid that way. But you're probably gonna have to buy some, and I was very fortunate when I contacted Viggo that he sent me quite a few. So it was kind of a pain, kind of a grind. Overall, would recommend. Definitely a challenge. That's it for the video. Sorry it was kind of long and it was pretty informative, but maybe not informative enough in parts. But I tried to cover his whole discography. It was pretty lengthy, but I hope you enjoyed it. Keep an eye out for more challenges on this channel to come.